Good afternoon, viewers and listeners, and welcome to this webinar hosted by the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. This evening, we have an interesting topic and discussion lined up for you, focusing on the International Labor Organization and its key agenda issues from the International Labor Conference held in June this year, 2024. So that we're going to be focusing on the topics decent work and the care economy, the fundamental principles and rights at work at critical crossroads, and certainly this should make for some interesting discussion. And finally, protection against biological hazards, as the ILO would have sought to initiate a first discussion on this issue with the view of moving towards some sort of standard setting for this particular issue. So we want to welcome all of you this evening, all of you, of course, online in Trinidad and Tobago and other parts of the region. Hearty welcome on behalf of the college. And I would also like to take this opportunity to just welcome our panelists. First of all, let me just indicate I'm Trevor Johnson, your host or moderator for the evening, based here at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. The panelists for this evening, I just want to introduce them at this time. We have, first of all, Ms. Rosa May Whittier. Rosa May is the Director, International Affairs at the Ministry of Labor. She has an academic background in economics. She is an undergraduate and at the undergraduate and postgraduate level. She has focused in bachelor's in economics from the University de Camgüey, she will probably pronounce it better than I can, and a master's in development studies from the University of Glasgow. She has worked in the area of policy and research on labor and employment issues for over 10 years. Throughout her career, she has held roles at the Ministry of Finance. She has also been associated and worked with the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. She has also worked at the CARICOM Secretariat. She currently serves, as I would have indicated, as the head of the International Affairs Unit at the Ministry of Labor. So a hearty welcome to our first panelist, Ms. Rosa May Whittier. Next, we have no stranger to us here at Cipriani College. We have Comrade Ozzie Warwick. Comrade Ozzie is the Chief Education and Research Officer and Treasurer of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. He's also the General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement and the Movement for Social Justice. He also serves as a member on the Financial Control Committee and Presidential Council of the World Federation of Trade Unions. So welcome to you, Comrade Ozzie. We have also with us, well, certainly homegrown here at the college, our head of the Labor Studies Department, Mr. Ian Daniel, a member of the faculty since 1999. And it says here he's often described by our director, Dr. Andre Vincent Henry, as the conscience of the institution. Mr. Daniel holds a Master of Science degree in sociology and has lectured in industrial relations, politics, labor history, sociology, and psychology. He's also involved in the design and facilitation of specialized and customized training interventions in industrial relations practice. And he is a member of the Registration, Recognition, and Certification Board of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Daniel has worked in education, in finance, retail sales services. He has been a consultant, a writer, researcher, local community organizer, mass designer, artist, and poet. His current research interest lies in the area of identity and social change. So welcome, Ian, to this very important discussion on the ILO key agenda issues coming out of the International Labour Conference of 2024. And the context we want to put this in this evening is looking at not just these topics in isolation, but we want to put them in the context of the implications for the workplace in Trinidad and Tobago today. So these are key issues which would have been discussed at the recent in ILO ILC. And we really want to see how some of these things can be practicalized as we move forward. Each of the panelists will have 8 to 10 minutes to make some opening remarks or speak to the topics, and then we would go into open discussion. For those who have joined us online, if you have questions during that period when we having the discussion, you will be invited to post your questions, and they will be relayed to me so that it can be put to the respective panelists. You may have a question you want a particular panelist to answer or respond to. You can just indicate, or it will just be put to the panel if it's an open question to any of them. So I would like to just get straight into it at this point and invite our first panelist, Rosa May, Director of International Affairs at the Ministry of Labor, to make your opening remarks on presentation. So Rosa May, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Trevor, and good afternoon to everyone. Firstly, on behalf of the ministry, I'd really like to say thanks to the college for organizing this activity, because it is important for us to ensure that information on the outcomes of the conference are disseminated as widely as possible. And this is an excellent opportunity for us. So we're very grateful that a partner can organize this activity. So the International Labour Conference, or the ILC, is the largest global meeting on labor and employment issues. It really brings together thousands of tripartite representatives, and that's no exaggeration. It is literally a meeting with thousands of people, tripartite, so government, worker, and employer, from the ILO's 187 member states. And the ILC is a bit, what should I say? It may not be what you would think about when you think about a conference. So if you think about a conference, you may think that there's an agenda and there will be different sessions where subject matter experts may present on these agenda items. But that's not what happens at the ILC. So at the ILC, there are the issues, first of all, the various agenda items are considered concurrently. So all happening at the same time. The conference is 2 weeks in duration. So you may wonder what's happening for 2 weeks. So in terms of considering the agenda items, so as I said, they're considered concurrently. So you find that one person would not be able to follow all of them because they're being discussed at the same time. So typically what you find is within delegations, certain people are assigned to follow certain agenda items. So typically if you run into colleagues, the first question they'll ask you is, which item are you following? And you say, well, I'm following this one. So having said that, so what happens is that the office, the ILO office, the secretariat, will prepare reports on each of these agenda items. And Trevor, you mentioned that we're looking at 3, but that's not the complete agenda. There were 7 agenda items, right? So the ILO prepares reports on thematic reports on each of these agenda items. All of these documents are publicly available on the ILO's website. the documents are not confidential. And then when the conference begins, the first thing that will happen is that constituents, the social partners, will have an opportunity to make opening remarks regarding the report, and then conclusions are drafted. Conclusions on outcome documents are drafted, and these conclusions are reviewed at the committee stage, because it is committees that then consider each agenda item. And that may sound simple. However, this process can be very lengthy and very detailed. We can have a half an hour discussion on one word. And of course, it is a tripartite discussion. So you can imagine that there are several views being tabled with a view to get a consensus document. So the conversations can be very exciting at times, but at the same time, they're extremely informative, because when delegations are putting forward their point or indicating their opposition to a particular point, they really have to present a justification and their rationale. And these discussions are extremely rich and extremely informative. So at the end of it, the committee will agree on the conclusions. And sometimes you wonder, how will we arrive to consensus? Because sometimes the views are so polarized, but we always get there somehow or the other. And these conclusions then, which are at the committees, which are considering each agenda item. So there was a committee for decent work, a committee for fundamentals, a committee for biohazards. These, at the end of the committee stage, those conclusions then go to conference plenary, and the conference adopts these conclusions. These conclusions are also available publicly on the ILO's website. So that's just giving a bit of a general idea of the conference itself, and to share on some of these agenda items. So first of all, on biological hazards, now I'd like to point out that there are different types of discussions in the ILC. What do I mean by that? So if you look at an agenda, you would see that biological hazards is a standard setting discussion, and fundamental principles and rights at work was a recurrent discussion, and decent work and the care economy was a general discussion. What does this mean? So firstly, with biological hazards, of course, so this was a standard setting discussion, and that means that the objective is to develop a new ILO instrument. We may know that the ILO has several instruments, over about 190 conventions and 206 recommendations. So those are ILO instruments. So the objective here is to have a new instrument. It will be a convention supplemented by a recommendation on biological hazards at the workplace. Of course, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of having a standard on biological hazards in the workplace really came to the fore. Now, these things will become legal instruments, and they're new instruments. So ILO recognizes that it may not be possible or feasible to be able to adopt these new instruments in one sitting. So when a new instrument is being developed, it is considered by the conference twice in 2 consecutive sittings. So biological hazards was on the agenda for this year's ILC. It will be on the agenda again next year in 2025 for a second discussion. This is referred to as a double discussion process. So that's because these things require careful consideration. And moving on now to fundamental principles and rights at work. This was not a standard setting discussion, so we don't expect a new instrument on this, but it is a recurrent discussion, meaning that this issue is recognized as important and recognized as being needing to be considered by the conference within at periodic intervals. So this issue was last considered by the conference in 2017. So what are the fundamental principles and rights at work? There are 5, and they are enshrined in the 1998 Declaration, and these are freedom of association and collective bargaining, elimination of forced labor, elimination of child labor, elimination of discrimination in employment, and access to safe and healthy working conditions. This last one, safe and healthy working conditions, OSH related, was recently recognized or designated as a fundamental principle at right at work in 2022. So the 1998 declaration recognized the first four, and this declaration was amended in 2022 to now include a fifth fundamental principle and right at work. We say FPRW, which is OSH related. And for each of those 5 principles, there are instruments, conventions that are also designated as fundamental. And that means that member states have an obligation to adhere to these instruments, whether or not they've ratified the instruments. And how does the ILO know if you are adhering to them? We are required to report annually on these fundamental instruments if you haven't ratified them. If you've ratified them, we report annually on ratified instruments. So that's how they check on us. But for those instruments that you haven't ratified, they still check on us. And we do this report on fundamental instruments every year. So that brings me now to the third agenda item we're looking at, which is the care economy. So what is the care economy? So the care economy is a broad umbrella term that looks at sectors that provide care and services, such as in the health sector, of course, also domestic workers, and also in the education sector. So we can collectively refer to these things as the care economy. And if we look at certain demographic trends, many countries have aging populations. So of course, there will be an increasing need for elder care, which of course is a component of the care economy. So we see an increasing importance of this sector, and hence it was deemed to be important for a general discussion. So it's a general discussion, which means it's not a standard setting discussion. There will be no instrument, no convention or recommendation coming out of this year's discussion on it. As I said, there are conclusions, there are outcome documents, but it wouldn't be an instrument. And also, it's not a recurrent discussion, unlike fundamental principles. So it is not scheduled to be considered periodically, but we can look at it as a standalone discussion in this year's ILC. So I'm sure I've used my 10 minutes. So Chair, I'll hand back over to you.
Okay. So thank you so very much, Rosemary, for setting the tone and also helping us to understand the context in which the International Labour Conference takes place, and also why it takes as much as 2 weeks, which is a very long time for a conference. So that was very important for the viewers and listeners to be able to understand. I would now like to invite my colleague and comrade, Ozzy Warwick, General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement, to make his opening remarks and presentation. Comrade Ozzy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Trevor, and of course, thanks to Cipriani College for having this very important forum. Let me thank Ms. Whittier for providing the context and setting the stage for this discussion. Now, when I think about rights at work, it really is about power relations at work. Knowledge of the rights, exercising those rights, and how those rights are advanced or rolled back are all mediated by power relations. And in that regard, I would like to actually approach my talk with what I would call 5 generalized propositions. I know the ILO have what they call the FPRW, fundamental principles and rights at work. So I'm proposing 5 GPRWs, generalized propositions and rights at work. And those generalized propositions that I'm going to put forward are within the context of capitalist society and the emergent capitalist state driven by neoliberal policies. The world of work is not some isolated system separate and apart from the world. It is part of the world and therefore subsumed within the world capitalist system. In that world, the real world, we have this impersonal domination of capital and the exploitation of the capital wage labor relationship and the reproduction of that relationship. Therefore, the workplace becomes the theater of the antagonism of this relationship, which is characterized by the nature of work and the change in labor and production process. But even with these changes, the fundamental remains, that is, capitalist production and exchange is a profit-driven system with the transformation or valorization of the money value, which was invested in the production and commodities, into a return on investment or greater monetary value from their sale, with the additional value forming the basis of a new money value. And this is reproducing itself without limit, perpetual accumulation. Within the world of work, this transformation or valorization process manifests itself really as the difference between the monetary value workers receive, which is the wage and terms and conditions of work, for selling their labor power for a period of time to those who own and control the investment, capital, on the one hand, and then the monetary value of the collective workforce that creates that monetary value during that period. So having established that understanding, let us look at the GPRW, the Generalized Propositions and Rights at Work. And the 5 propositions are this. 1, that the current world of work requires, as stated in a recent ILO publication, a new social contract to achieve social justice in the ever-changing world. 2, deepening democracy within the workplace to fully democratize our society. 3, the need for transformative just transition. 4, looking at artificial intelligence, not in a one road trajectory, but really at a crossroads. And I'll explain that a bit. And 5, finally, class consciousness as being core to the realization of rights in the world of work. So let's go with first the new social contract. The world of work, the current social contract is no longer adequate. So why has it served well to bring new enlightenment ideas like freedom, rights, state obligation, and so on? And it laid the bedrock for the emergence of capitalism and even provided for the emergence of trade unions. It also enabled states to balance the adverse outcomes of capitalism with a new post-World War II social settlement. However, I want to suggest that that neoliberalism has undermined that social settlement. I want to go to deepening democracy at work. We must increase the influence of ordinary working people, workers who make companies run regardless of the type of company. You see, in the absence of workers' choice and power, the capitalist and bourgeois politicians will work solely in the interest of profits. So workers' power then becomes the only counterbalance to the corporate power, or what this new term that is bandied about quite regularly in the area of industrial relations, management prerogative. So we require a radical labor legislative agenda to change the labor governance system and have a rights-based approach integrated into the system, which will do what? 1, make it easier for workers to join a trade union, which will be consistent with one of the fundamental principles and rights at work outlined by the ILO. 2, removal of the special tribunal that exists within our Industrial Relations Act. And 3, expand the right to strike. Those 3 things, there are others, but if you, for the purpose of this talk, since I've given 10 minutes, I just want to focus on those 3. Making it easier to join a trade union, removal of the special tribunal, and expansion of the right to strike. So let me now turn to transformative just transition. I would like to suggest a set of principles for a transformative just transition, which would look at 1, democratization of production, ownership, and control. What this means is that we need to decommercialize and decommodify energy. We need to also have and focus on energy sovereignty and look at the public pathway approach as opposed to privatize to decarbonize approach. The other principle is creating a low carbon energy system that produces adequate energy supply and ensure universal energy provision. We also need the co-production of knowledge through action research. And we also, to me, a key principle, if we want to achieve this transformative just transition, is the capacity to challenge and confront prevailing social formations and build social alliances built on the idea of solidarity, and therefore harness various forms of social power. Let me touch on the area of artificial intelligence and the world of work. The problem is that new generative AI is being introduced into a capitalist society that is not equipped to handle it. What do I mean? You see, the profit motive, which is already socially destructive, AI will make it worse because it will allow companies to figure out how to more efficiently exploit people. So the new technologies are being developed by private corporations that have no incentive to ensure that a benefit to them is a benefit to all. So we as workers now have to ensure that the productivity gains from AI benefits workers and not just shareholders. In other words, how to make it, that is the AI, increase labor power value and not just shareholder value. So to me, it's a question of whether the wealth and efficiency gains of AI where will it flow? Will it flow, of course, continually to the elite few, or will it actually flow to the benefit of the vast majority of working people? And I want to bring in now the fifth general proposition, and that has to do with class consciousness. You see, many of the actions, policies, and measures that we have experienced is generally towards breaking class consciousness. So we therefore need to restructure the power relations in society. And this is critical to confront the continuous commodification, monetarization, and valorization process. And herein lies the importance of class consciousness. Class consciousness is the understanding of our class as a subject of history, agents that can shape history, not objects of history, where we are simply moving to the whatever new terminology or fad is introduced, like the so-called new normal and so on. Okay, we have seen that through the actions of those before us, who went before us, recognizing their class interest and therefore pursuing that class interest, they were able to win through struggle great benefits. Class consciousness is therefore grounded in an understanding of the nature of our society, which is being more and more transformed into a society with greater emphasis placed on profits in the interest of the elite class. So it is generally understanding that as the nature of our society and recognizing that that type of society which is not in the interest of the large majority of people. Recognizing that, we then engage in a struggle to transform that. And this is where as we speak of an unjust transition from a society with job security to one of job insecurity, a transition from a society which has rights-based approaches to a society that has profit-based approaches, from public goods to private interest. How do you reverse that? I'd like to suggest, as part of this final general proposition, that we need a revolutionary political consciousness to fully position workers' rights at the center of a new model of human society. And this is where we need labor education to build that revolutionary political consciousness. Because rights, and when we talk about rights at work, it is not an abstraction. It is really it is a bread and butter issue. The ability of a worker to exercise their right, their fundamental right, means whether they will have a decent wage, whether they'll have decent terms and conditions for things as basic as vacation leave, sick leave, etc. As it stands now, what we have is a society where majority of working people live in absolute fear. They live in fear because of the uncertainty as to whether they will have their job tomorrow. Now, that may not matter if a human being can exist and reproduce their daily life in the absence of having a decent wage to exchange for their shelter, for their food, for their clothing, etc. But that is not the society that we exist in. We exist in a society where a human being can only sustain themselves, can reproduce their daily life by exchanging the value of their labor power for a wage, which they then exchange for these goods and services. And therefore, exercising rights at the workplace, exercising rights in the world of work, becomes a life and death situation. It is an existential situation. And this is why I am suggesting, if we are to truly recognize and realize rights at work, then we have to consider these 5 general propositions, in particular, the need for a new social contract. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you so very much, Comrade Ozzy. Already sounds like we need this webinar to go on for about a week just to wrap our head around some of these issues. So certainly we can now begin to understand and appreciate when Rosa May indicated that the ILC, the International Labour Conference, takes place over a 2-week period. I think with Comrade Ozzy's input, and even that of Comrade Rosa May, we're beginning to understand why that 2-week time frame is required. And we still have one more input to come from our own head of labor studies here at Cipriani College. So I now want to invite Ian Daniel, head of the labor studies here at Cipriani, to present his opening remarks and his, share with us his thoughts. Ian?
Thank you, Trevor. My comments are not as comprehensive or as deeply worked out as the 2 comrades who went before. I am a lot more, speculative in my comments tonight. What I looked at was, as Trevor pointed out, the practical implications of making these things part of the world of work. And I'm focused on the idea of connecting decent work to the care economy, which is a really interesting concept, especially when you look at the context of where we are in the Caribbean and in the wider Latin America and Caribbean region and in the Southern Hemisphere and as a developing society. How do you get from decent work to a care economy? And there are lots of difficulties for me there. To arrive at a care economy is a little bit difficult because of the implications of the concept of economy, the production, dissemination, and consumption of care in the context of buying and selling in an area of the world where care can often appear to be haphazard at best. And so, for me, what becomes important is focusing on what are the intermediary points between decent work and this care economy. And the important thing there in between there for me is actually the development of a care culture, a culture of care. I won't define some of the concepts because some of the other presenters have already gone through things like telling us what decent work is. But what I do want to highlight is that a big part of the decent work agenda is social protection. And I want to suggest that social protection is a major part of the context of care. And so one of the questions that raises in terms of making this practical is what is the culture of social protection in our region? Our region has severe deficits in social protection. Social protection, like for unemployment, is basically unheard of in much of the region. Disability, maternity is one of the best developed in the region, especially in comparison to the United States, who is going through a real horror right now in terms of the provision of maternity care, pensions, and in relation to the care economy, health and healthcare coverage, for which we have large deficits as well. And so for me, it becomes important in getting to a care economy, understanding that you have to, in this region, travel through a large number of people who work, but who fall outside of social protection, the informal sector, many of whom are unprotected in many ways, inclusive of healthcare. And so why is that important right now? Because we've just come through the COVID-19 pandemic. We are experiencing, we just had Beryl pass by or through and over several societies. And we have with the realization of aging populations in our society. And all of these things create the need for, create the capacity to, and the delivery of care in our societies. And when you consider that more than 30% of most of our GDP happens in the context of the informal sector, where people are vulnerable and lack social protection, then we are talking about using decent work to create improvement, strengthening in the healthcare economy, in the care economy. It means that we have to go through the very idea of how do we engineer decent work. It's an impossibility to arrive at the care economy without dealing with the realities of our deficits in decent work itself. It is really amazing when one recognizes that it's almost 30 to 40% of the workforce in many societies in Latin America and Trinidad and the Caribbean who are involved in the informal sector, and that we have large amounts of youth unemployment. We're talking about almost 25% of youth unemployment in the region, and that's an optimistic figure. And that so many of the people affected by youth and unemployment in particular are women, who therefore become affected in terms of care economies or lack thereof, especially when you consider how much of the responsibility for care falls on the shoulders of women. So we are looking at a region where decent work is under severe strain for so many reasons, historically and most recently, given some of the largest developments in human history. And so how do we get to focus on a care economy in this context? And it's obvious for me that it means that we have to pay particular attention to those who are most vulnerable in our society. And that means that we have to figure out how to extend a culture of care, the reality of care to the people who are most vulnerable. And for me, that's the people in the informal sector. Even if your healthcare system is extremely effective, I won't say efficient, and if people cannot afford it, then how do you access it? So we have to go back to the concept of social protection as a way station towards care economy, as a means of developing a national culture of care that then devolves into creating the capacity of people to access, care, access proper care. And for that, what we need to look at, I think, is how do we innovate in the informal economy to create elements, those crucial elements of formality that are attached to social security. But how do we do that? Because we always talk about transitioning to formality, but how do we transition to formality without creating economic challenge in the informal sector and imposing barriers? Because we need to understand that since COVID, most of the recovery that is happening for people, for working class people, is actually happening in the informal sector. If we attempt to transition to the formal sector, is there a possibility of harming the people who use the informal sector as their means of recovery? And we have to accept that the formal economy simply has never produced enough opportunity for the working people of the region. So the informal sector is a bit of an inconvenient reality, but it's a reality that has to be supported and used however possible. We have to bring institutional support to the people involved in the informal sector to empower them to organize and provide access to social security for themselves. And we have to overcome the formal employment model of access to social security, which creates the relegation of the non-employed to a kind of grants-based system. And it refers to something that Ozzy was mentioning, the transitioning away from a system that does not recognize that certain things exist or should exist as rights. We tend to have a system that is based on grants, the largesse of the state, the charity of the state, but during the economic downturn, that has a tendency to dry up. So what I'm suggesting here is that to talk about the care economy and to talk about strengthening the care economy, we have to kind of like go backwards in the chain of events, and we have to focus on the vulnerable in our society. And that means, for me, backing it up to some of the most crucial gaps that we have, which is providing social security for a lot of people who simply have no access to care or who are challenged in their ability to provide care, recognizing that social security is a part of the provision of care in our society. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Comrade Trevor.
Okay, thanks, Ian, for your input. And the challenge that all of you have given me this afternoon is that, we can have a discussion separately with each of you for about an hour or so, but we only have 45 minutes or thereabout to do this. And and of course, we may probably have some questions coming in, so we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, so I just want to remind those online, if you do wish to make an inquiry, ask a question, you can just type it in, and it will be relayed to the respective panelists who you would like to respond to that. But Rosemary, I really want to just come back to you a bit. The ILO, International Labour Organization, I think you did indicate, and Trinidad and Tobago is a member state of the ILO. Hence the reason, of course, we participate in this annual International Labour Conference. But sometimes there are perspective in some quarters that it doesn't quite touch the average worker in the street. How, you know, they're looking to see how these things evolve and comes down into the workplace. So my question to you is, or if you can care to share, expand a bit more. So the ILC has come 2024. It has finished. You know, the respective contingents of representatives, government, employer, worker representatives are back home. It's like, what is the process from here? Because we have these three topics. I know you said there, of course, were other areas, but these are the three that we focus in on: decent work and the care economy, fundamental principles and rights at work, and protection against biological hazards. So what happens next is we have, you know, contingents have gone back to their respective countries. In the context of Trinidad and Tobago, what are the next steps that happens with respect to, if you want to choose one or any of these agenda items from the ILC?
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for that question. And I, for one, always like to know what happens next, right? So the conference has come and gone, but what happens next? What's the follow-up? How do we translate the discussions and the deliberations into concrete actions? So as I would have indicated, for each agenda item, there are outcome documents, right? But now the outcome documents are not binding in themselves, but they provide guidance to countries on how to take action in these respective areas. And so I think one of the first things is disseminating the information, disseminating the key outcomes and the key elements of the deliberations. And the government certainly has a role in doing that. As colleagues would know, we do place emphasis on sharing the outcomes. We will be circulating these outcomes in writing to workers and employers groups. And also, as we indicated, one of them would become, before I say that, and sometimes we also have sessions on where we focus on specific agenda items. Colleagues may recall, trying to think back now, I think, right, last year, 2023, one of the agenda items was a new recommendation on apprenticeships, and we organized a session and we presented this new apprenticeships recommendation to stakeholders. And the year before that, there was a social and solidarity economy was an agenda item. And it was the first time that this issue of social and solidarity economy was being considered at this level within the whole UN system. So for that reason, we thought it would be good to have a standalone session on that. And we did. But specific to some of the issues here, as we indicated, biological hazards, there will be another consideration of this in 2025. And the next steps would include, so whenever the ILO adopts a new instrument, all member states have to submit it to their competent authority. What does that mean? You have to submit it to the agency that is responsible for legislation. In our case, it's the Parliament. So we will do that. But we also, once the instruments are adopted by the conference, member states have an option to ratify. And as some of us will know, some better than others, because some of us are more involved than others, consideration of ratification is a tripartite exercise. Allow me to just speak on something else, which is related, because there's another instrument. There's an instrument. Of course, all of these instruments, sometimes we refer to them by the numbers, right? So, and it's a sequential numbering, right? So convention number 144 is the Convention on Tripartite Consultation regarding instruments. So countries cannot make a decision or should not make a decision on ratification based on the government's deliberation alone. If you ratify this instrument, there's an obligation to engage in tripartite consultation when deliberating on whether an instrument should be ratified. And as I said, this country has ratified that Convention 144. And in order to facilitate this tripartite consultation on instruments, we have established a committee, a tripartite committee, which considers instruments. So once there's a new instrument, we take it to the committee, and the committee will determine when it will consider it for ratification and if it will recommend ratification. I'll say one more thing. How do they, consider whether we will ratify or not? It's a detailed process, as you're very familiar, Trevor. They go provision by provision of the instrument to see what the country has in place that will make the country compliant with the convention, and then make an assessment. Are we placed to ratify this, or do we need to put some more things in place before we are able to ratify? Now, why is it important to be in compliance with the convention, to ensure you have things in place for compliance with the convention before ratifying? Because, as I mentioned before, the ILO checks up on you. It's not enough to ratify. They check up on you periodically. And how do they check up on you? We're required to report annually on conventions that we have ratified. And they ask you, okay, convention, whatever, article, whatever calls for this. What do you have for this? What do you have for this? What do you have for this? So that's why it's important to ensure that you have things in place for compliance with the convention before ratifying. So those are some of the things that will happen thereafter.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. We certainly remember this is a dynamic discussion, so we'd certainly come back to you if any of the other panelists want to comment further. But Comrade Ozzy, well, it's well known, obviously, and if we didn't know it before this afternoon, that you have a real passion for fundamental rights and principles at work. And I just want to sort of maybe put you on the spot a bit, because I think you are a labor representative on the minimum wages board. And there's a discussion now taking place about living wage versus, or starting, I should say, on minimum wage or versus living wage. But two things caught my eye this week, between over the weekend and this week. One of the items you mentioned was profit and the issue of wages, etc. But one company, I think earlier this week, declared a profit of $2.3 billion. I didn't say 200 million. I said $2.3 billion in Trinidad and Tobago at a time when workers are being offered 4%, or we're asking workers to sacrifice. Another company that earlier this year, I think, raised the price of one of its products, a well-known company. It just declared a profit, increase of profit over the last financial reporting period of 16%. Now, just earlier this year, when that company raised the cost of a particular item that many of our citizens seem to love to migrate towards, chicken, I'm talking about fried chicken, and they argued that, the costs had gone up of the raw inputs, and they had, if they didn't, do whatever, they would have been suffering. But they just registered a 16% increase over the last reporting period. I just raised those issues because we're trying to see if we can tie in when we talk about fundamental rights and principles at work, and does that include some level of fairness or equity with respect to relativity, wages, salaries, etc.? I know, of course, the economists and the capitalists will argue profit doesn't pay wages, but when a company can declare $2.3 billion in Trinidad and Tobago that can wipe out part of our national deficit, then I just find it interesting. So I just wanted to tease you to perhaps speak around some of those issues for a little bit.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to do that in a few minutes because I think that is a whole panel right there. Right there, Trevor. $2.3 billion. But they say profits do not pay wages, but it is wage laborers who create profits. Okay. That is the part of the equation that people like to either conceal, ignore, pretend don't exist. Because a company to declare $2.3 billion in profit is the result of the fact that there were workers in that company that went to work every morning from morning to evening. Okay. And what I think, because you introduced the question around the issue of minimum wage, right? Can you imagine that we are existing in a society where we are okay with a company declaring $2.3 billion, but the majority or a large portion of our people in the same society, this is not now $2.3 billion in Mars or in the next country. This is $2.3 billion in the same society whereby a single mother or a father have to earn $3,500 a month. And I think we're not wrapping our heads around that fundamental contradiction because it's the same society. You know what is $3,500 a month, and we're comfortable with that. In fact, and that's the new minimum wage, right? That is not a decent wage. Nobody could live a decent life with $3,500 a month. Let's be real. Let's be honest to ourselves. $3,500 a month. That rent alone is $1,500. Groceries alone, if they have a family, 2 children, 3 children, 4 children, well, look goodness, gone. All right. Therefore, it means that many of our people are living a life that is devoid of dignity. Many of them have to go into groceries and put back items like sugar, flour, oil, because it's just too much. All right. And in fact, that is at the minimum wage level. But when you check it, a lot of workers who are daily rated workers, laborers, etc., who make up a large portion of our workforce, a large portion of our society, they earn about $5,000 a month, you know. In the same society where companies can declare hundreds of millions of dollars in profits. Now, you cannot tell me that there's something fundamentally wrong with a society that enables that kind of contradiction. And what is scary is that you're comfortable with it. All right. I'm saying that we have to, in order to shift our paradigm, we have to become uncomfortable about something like that. We have to become uncomfortable. And you know what is worse, Trevor, is that there's this attempt to systematically dismantle other jobs that have decent terms and conditions with things like index, COLA, and so on. I mean, you have a situation where not only are they asking you to take 4% over 6 years, people who earning $6,000, $5,000, they're also telling you non-consolidation of COLA on top of that. So you really are left with bare bones just to survive. We've become, Trinidad and Tobago have become a society of just survival. That's what we represent. It's just sheer survival. The idea of building a strong society with a vision of, you know, I don't want to say make Trinidad and Tobago great again, or even make Trinidad and Tobago great, but the idea that we can live in a society where our people are living in dignity, that is now out of the door. We are living in a society where people are trying to survive just to make ends meet. On the issue of minimum wage, it has to be, we need to have a discussion around living wage. And can you imagine in this same society where I've just laid out for you, you see, I've just laid out the context of the society. You telling me that the Employers Association said that Trinidad and Tobago not ready for a living wage. What that's supposed to mean? I wonder if that really resonates with what we heard them publicly. And the thing is that they can feel comfortable making such a statement publicly that the country not ready for a living wage. You're telling me that therefore our people not ready to live a decent life, our people not ready to live with some level of dignity? That's what you're saying. Because all a living wage is a wage that can enable you to live decently, not even comfortably, just decently, right? So, and the thing is, we are not alone on that. And I'm happy that we have the international director from the ministry when she raised such important points coming out of the ILO. The ILO supports a living wage. Let me just make that absolutely clear. The ILO supports, in fact, let me just, for Trinidad and Tobago who feel that, we, at a level of labor, we are just rhetorical. At a meeting of experts on wage policies that was held just this year in February, and which was endorsed by the ILO's governing body, and Rosa would have give us a lot of information to understand how that governing body works, and that is a tripartite governing body. At their session on the 13th of March, a very important date. I hope people remember it was the date of the Grenadian Revolution, but all right. Another panel. The experts agree that decent wages are central. Decent wages are central to economic and social development and to advance social justice, and that it plays an essential role in reducing poverty and inequality and ensuring a decent and dignified life. So when we talk about decent wages, when we talk about negotiating for a decent wage, it is not just about the monetary value, it is about how it contributes to economic and social development, how it contributes to advancing some level of equality in the society, how it contributes to reducing poverty in the society, how it contributes to people living decent and dignified lives. So when you are attacking decent wages and decent jobs with well-paying jobs, or you're saying that the country is not ready, I want us to be clear. When the employer class is saying that Trinidad and Tobago is not ready for living wage, what they are in fact saying is that Trinidad and Tobago is not ready for economic and social development, that Trinidad and Tobago is not ready to advance social justice, that Trinidad and Tobago is not ready to reduce poverty, Trinidad and Tobago is not ready to reduce inequality, and certainly Trinidad and Tobago not ready to ensure a decent and dignified life for people. That is what they mean. And in order for us to counter that, Trevor, we have to ensure that we do what we can to build the class consciousness so that there can be an opposing force, an opposing social force that could push back on those ideas and reject those ideas outright and say, no, that vision of Trinidad and Tobago, you see that, take a pirogue and ship yourself to some other country. That is not the Trinidad and Tobago we want to build. We want to build a different Trinidad and Tobago where our people can live a decent and dignified life, and that is not too much to ask.
Thank you very much, Comrade Azzi. And again, that passion coming out in full force there. Ian, as this question, well, I hope I still have a position after this at the college, but as head of the labor studies at the college, the labor studies department, can you speak to the possibility of the college working in collaboration with the ILO Caribbean office to both educate students of the college and to create a wider societal, and I should say, and staff as well, and to create a wider societal awareness of the ILC agenda items, to move them from the realm of just being an academic discussion to being part of the fabric of our daily lives and social justice. So can you speak to how you can see Cipriani College maybe partnering with the ILO to, again, help to practicalize this and take it from just on paper to people understanding it as part of their daily lives, how it factors in?
Well, forgive me, I'm distracted by the smell of the item that you were talking about earlier from the back of the room.
Yeah.
Well, that very idea, Trevor, is the thing that has been animating, especially in the labor studies department, our discussions about how we do what we do. I mean, we're starting with rethinking the curriculum of our programs, rethinking our content, and trying to reframe the typical learning outcomes in a course, in a training program, in the context of social justice. How do we achieve social justice? And so in delivering what we do, in delivering what we teach, and in looking at how we teach, there's a need that we have been trying to implement, that we need to go further in, to actually start focusing on the practical outcomes of justice, as opposed to getting an A in economics, in intro to economics. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we've started talking about is the importance of not just teaching like intro to economics, but teaching alternative views on economics, alternative views to neoliberal economics, so that we can start to think about doing things differently and not simply accepting an orthodox that, as Comrade Ozzy points out, does not benefit a lot of our populations. And that was my point about journeying through the informal sector, because we have significant amounts of our society that does not benefit from the way in which our society is organized at present. One of the important things I think as part of that, connected, is the ability to move out of curriculum, to move out of courses and certification, and to engage in empowerment of people in context, and which is a thing that, both you and I have been trying to do, to go to people, working people, reach them, meet them where they are, and talk about the things that we do in the context of their lives. And very importantly, to tie up to what I hate to talk after Ozzy, because Ozzy steal all the good points, but this is talking about moving beyond the individual focus, which education tends to be about my certification so that I can get a better job and I can live better, to moving towards the social, understanding the whole of society, understanding how we affect each other, and how the whole society benefits if all of us are empowered, if all of us improve at the same time. And this kind of leads me to my personal philosophical position, that education in all of its form, in the classroom, outside of the classroom, for certification, for personal empowerment, for group empowerment, needs to be a kind of Renaissance education, where what we are focusing on is how to think about you in the world, how to think about the world around you, how to think about your connections to the other people in the world with you, so that, again, what you have is a cultivation of humanity, a strengthening of humanity, and the recognition that, yeah, I could be rich, but that doesn't have to be at the expense of the other people who share this world with me. After how many billions do you need more money? And how much of that 2.3 billion can be more adequately shared amongst the people who make that money, so that the society benefits as well? A long-winded way of saying that we really have to get to the people and do exactly what I was here saying, affect the consciousness of people, so that people are less focused on me and more focused on us.
Yes. Ian, thanks, Ian, for that input. We have one comment from online, more comment, but I could just share it. So perhaps in case you or Comrade Ozzy wants to comment, because you did speak a lot earlier when you presented on the focus on decent work and the care economy and the whole issue of social security. And the concern, I think, being expressed by one of the participants online speaks to the very issue that in Trinidad and Tobago today, we have the self-employed not being incorporated into the national insurance system, so that you can go to many villages or communities and let's say fishermen, for example, who fish 20, 30 years. That's what they do. And they do contribute to the, development of the society by that. Or farmers, or, we pass people up and down the highway every day. Some of them, literally, it's their career. It's not like a hustle. It may seem to us to be a hustle, but for them, it's their way of life. And so the concern being expressed online is that we seem to be excluding a critical element of our citizenry. And I suppose they were just perhaps looking, you did speak to it earlier, but they were just emphasizing that, perhaps looking to see if there were any further comments, because they were saying, it seems as if the Minister of Finance or the government spoke to that in 2021 and said that it was prohibitive to add these people to these persons to the national insurance system. So I'm not sure if either you or Comrade Ozzy want to make a brief comment on that before we move on.
Well, let me go first before Ozzy takes it. But I think I would say that what we keep demonstrating is an astounding lack of imagination. You go around the world and you see, Rosamie spoke about the social and solidarity economy, and I always have to bite my tongue in other communities because I don't want to come out and say, listen, we're trade unions. We were the first social in that solidarity economy. That's what we are about. And that trade unionism and solidarity economies represent an innovation, an attempt to innovate in the way we organize ourselves. We are trapped in this concept of providing social security and providing the means to implement care for so many of our societies on the basis of the formal economy model, where you get your emolument income, you get taxed, and you pay into these insurance systems, as if people who earn income in the way that you were describing can't do that too. You may not be able to do it in a structured way as it occurs with me, where quite frankly, I do it involuntarily because the taxman dips into my pocket before I even see my money. So to make it out as if I am privileged simply because I get my money, in that manner, and not trying to figure out, okay, how do I bring the same privilege to these people who earn differently, but who do earn, who save differently, but who do save, who spend differently, but who do spend. It's simply a lack of imagination when you look around the world and see how many other people are doing it, are figuring out how to bring people who are in the informal economy into more effective usage of social security. And so a big part of it is that we are so locked into a particular model of capitalist economy that we really cannot see alternatives. And for a lot of people, if it means me not making more profit, then no, that can't be done. We are not ready for it. So let me yield the floor to Comrade Ozzy.
Well, Ian, one of the things I have to say going after you is that I have nothing else to add. I mean, really, there's absolutely nothing else that I could add to what you just to what you said. I totally, completely support and endorse it.
Thank you, Comrade Ozzy. And Comrade Rosamie, I want to come back to you again. I know you, in a sense, you are like in this on this panel, like our technocrat as it relates to the ILO and understanding how it works, etc. But, like a couple convention, because you said it's a sequential number. I think it's 189 for domestic workers and 190 for dealing with the issue of violence in the workplace. And I know you did, you were at pains to point out the process, but there's still a lot of concern within our not just the labor fraternity, but within society as a whole, given the critical issues. 190 is violence, both men and women, but we all know that it's significantly in Trinidad and Tobago in our society. Women, have been proven to be very much at risk with this particular issue. And then 189, the longstanding domestic workers convention. So the question is, or the observation is, who is ultimately responsible for the passage of these conventions? Is it the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago? Is it Parliament? And also the concerns arise because you do have one or two other Caribbean countries that have ratified these conventions, meaning it has gone through its full slew of whatever the process is. So there's just that concern that out there sometimes with especially those two conventions. I don't know if you're able to share a perspective on that.
Well, I'll endeavor to so do. Probably I'll start where you ended, right? Now, as I indicated before, there's a process to consider ILO instruments ratification, right? And you referred to other Caribbean countries having ratified some certain conventions within recent times. I think we would first need to verify if they also do similar processes, right? Or if they don't have a similar process. That would be the first thing I'd say, right? Secondly, keep in mind that there are the reporting obligations that go along with ratification. And sometimes not all of us are up to date with our reporting obligations. So Trinidad and Tobago is not one of those. ILO actually publishes a list of serious cases of failure to report. So saying that as well, that one of the implications of ratifying is the reporting obligation. And you may see many countries ratifying many things, but you may also see some of these countries on this list of failure to report. Anyways, so let me now go to the first thing, which I think is really the crux of the question you're asking. So as I indicated, this decision around ratification is not a government decision. It is taken in tripartite consultation. So it's a joint responsibility of the tripartite partners in terms of considering and making a recommendation. Yes, when a recommendation is made for ratification, it is submitted to the cabinet, and thereafter, if there are legislative changes that are required in order for the country to be in compliance with the convention, but then yes, the legislation will have to go to Parliament.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Rosemary. And I think, Comrade Ozzy, we may probably have time to just try and slip in this question before we begin to come to a wrap up. And because you spoke to the issue of artificial intelligence as one of the concerns or the observations that you raised regarding in the whole sort of capitalist evolving system, etc. And of course, it ties in very strongly with what we tend to refer here of the ILO, etc. The future of work. Even though, of course, many would say, of course, it's not the future of work as if it's coming. The future of work has arrived. It's here with us already. I recall, I think it was last year, or maybe it started the year before, the strike with the Writers and Actors Guild in the United States. And one of the things I recall reading about that was that they were challenging for was not so much salary, but the fact that one of the provisions that the film companies had put into the contract was the provision where they would have the image rights of an actor so that they can do one, let's say one sequence, one movie, etc. But then they can use AI to replicate and make possibly 10 more movies using that actor's image, voice, etc. without their permission. And that was one of the significant things in the very early stages of AI that the Actors Guild and the Writers Guild were sort of protesting strongly against. Remember that strike went on for several months, etc. Even the I think the president of the US joined the picket lines at some point. So just wanted you to sort of maybe expand the perspective on that artificial intelligence and the impact in the world of work before we get to a wrap up. Comrade Ozzy. You have to unmute, Comrade Ozzy, if you're hearing.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Right. No, I was saying that the issue of the artificial intelligence is an ever-evolving issue because the technology itself is evolving at a rapid rate. Not only that, it's really it's going to cause a huge revolutionary change in human society because for the first time we are creating a tool that can have agency. It's make decisions. If you look at the history of humanity and every tool that we've ever created, even computers, because with computers, you have to put an input into it. But this is one tool that can, in reproducing itself and with its self-learning capabilities, can present itself with free agency, free from the decision-making of humans, okay? That makes it a fundamentally different type of tool that we have created. Nobody else did, we did, okay? But the thing about it is that it is here. Now, let me just go back to the writers' strike. And I want us to frame it properly. The problem is framing this thing, right? The use of the images of the artists and the actors and so on and so on. The issue is that the companies using the tool to maximize profits through efficiency, which has been brought about by this technology at the expense of the writers, the actors, etc. I want us to understand that part really clearly, so that the issue is not the technology itself. It's just that the technology is now located in an economic system, especially in the issue of Hollywood, where you have these big companies that can now use this tool to increase efficiency and productivity and maximize a lot more profit, because remember, now they don't have to pay the writers, they don't have to pay the actors. So their profit margin increases at a huge, it's exponentially at the expense of the writers. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because you recall, as part of one of my general proposition, I said AI at a crossroads. And I said that because, and I want us to carefully think this through. I said it's at a crossroads because it doesn't mean that the current trajectory it is on, it is inevitable. It all will depend, that's why I said crossroads, on how we frame what this tool is and how it can be used, and the regulations that have to go into how it is used. So let me give you two quick scenarios. It can be one road. I said that's why I said a crossroads. It can be one road where artificial intelligence exacerbates inequality by replacing workers with no severance, no retraining, nothing. it gone hell-bent down the road in a capitalist system where big companies are able to use the tool to maximize profits, squeeze out smaller companies, and therefore create even more monopolization of wealth and capital. Okay, but that's one road. There's another road that the AI can be used because the gains from its productivity and its efficiency can allow people and humans to do other things other than get up in the morning, 4 o'clock, to try to get transport, to go to work and meet a horrible working condition, go through that for 8 to 9 hours and spend another 2 hours in traffic, come back home. So it depends on the governance model that we can put in place where AI can, through its the increased productivity, through its efficiency, in other words, emancipate human labor, where we can now, as human beings, pursue other things in our life other than working eight hours a day. Or it can, if we are not careful, be completely controlled by capital. In other words, it is not inevitable that capital alone own and control AI. AI can also become a public good, not necessarily a private one. So I lay all of that to say that the landscape is one of class struggle in the end. Class struggle to determine whether this tool can liberate human labor and emancipate human creativity and human life, or it is taken by capital and utilized to further dehumanize human beings.
Thank you so very much, Comrade Azi. I want to before we just do a quick wrap up, just to be faithful to just to indicate, we did get another comment regarding, in terms of, I think it was NGC also being identified by a participant in terms of a huge profit margin. But I think Comrade Ian would have also spoken to that in terms of, because this participant was basically asking, not just rhetorically, what does a huge profit margin mean for me, the average citizen? So, a national company makes a huge amount of profit. We need to begin to have a better understanding of how that translates to John Public, the average individual. So I wouldn't necessarily ask for a further comment on that, but I just wanted to put it in there that observation was also made. So we basically at the end of the time that we identified. So I'd just like to ask each of the panelists, starting with Rosamé, if you would like to make a brief closing comment, not probably 2 minutes or less. If you can, Rosamé.
Sure, thank you so much. I would just say that this is what we need to do. We need to be able to, after the conference, chew on the issues a bit more, dissect them, deconstruct them, and think about ways to translate them into concrete actions. The president of the conference, the labor minister from Moldova, he said this. He said that Geneva is not Las Vegas. What stays in Geneva, what happens in Geneva should not stay in Geneva. We need to socialize the results. So we're on board for that.
Thank you very much, Rosamé. Food for thought and certainly to implement. Comrade Azi.
Thank you, Rosa, for clarifying that Geneva is not Las Vegas. My concluding remarks is to bring together two ideas that both Ian and Rosa shared that I do not want for it to be taken for granted, because they are fundamental and they reinforce my very first generalized proposition, where Ian spoke to that question of the care economy and the culture of care. That is very opposed to the typical Western European conception of the economy. And if you couple that with the point Rosa made about the solidarity economy, what these things are telling us is that they have, to me, presented to us an alternative framework that can enable the new social contract. And that is extremely powerful. And to me, that is, I really hope the listening audience would really take away, because that is so fundamental. They have presented us, there is an alternative to the existing system, which perpetuates our existing system, which perpetuates inequality and perpetuate profit over people. They have presented a framework with the care economy and a culture of care, which is so closer to us as a people, and the solidarity economy, which is closer to the question of labor. And I think with those two concepts, providing that alternative framework, it have something for us to fight for. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Comrade Ozzy. And Ian, well, you're coming after Comrade Ozzy again. I don't know if you have anything to say, but closing.
Not much. Once again, he's eaten up all the good ideas, all the good concepts. But I want to come back to the discussion that we were having, and inevitably connected to something that Ozzy was saying earlier about using what's happening now to emancipate our societies. And so we can look at this idea of the care economy and the culture of care as an opportunity to create that emancipation. And for that to occur, I think we have to do certain things. We have to, one, see care as a universal right. And understand that social security is a route to creating that universal right of care. And we have to dismantle this tendency to look at taking care of people as something that is the result of a bizarre need and therefore grant-oriented and not a right that people should expect to be taken care of in a society. We need to ungender care, because a big part of the problem of care in our society is the imbalance between genders, men and women, who's responsible for that. The good thing that I can say is that that is happening organically, but it's not happening fast enough. We need parental education and parental support. We need to therefore develop our social work applications in society as part of this care economy. And then we need to re-socialize the public on things like mental health and the differently able that become the source of a lot of our care needs. Are we able to do that? I am not sure, because I am not seeing any bold social innovations coming out. I'm not seeing an effort to rethink the social contract in the context of these technological advances that is making it less necessary for people to work while we're producing large amounts of wealth that seem to go into the pockets of fewer and fewer people. And we are also not, again, coming back to a concept that Ozzy was talking about, we're not addressing the historical inequalities that make development inherently uneven because it's built on an uneven foundation. We need to engage in truth and reconciliation in an attempt to bring everybody up to a proper standard, so that even if you're a billionaire, Trevor, I'm making enough that I'm happy and I can survive with dignity. Yes, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you so very much, Ian. And let me just end by thanking all the panelists. Rosa May Withia, the Director of the International Affairs Division of the Ministry of Labor, Comrade Ozzy Warwick, General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement, and of course, many other hats that he wears. And of course, our own Ian Daniel, Head of the Labor Studies Department here at Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, other support staff from the Labor Studies Department, from the Elmer Francois Department of Institute of Cipriani College, and of course the audiovisual team supporting us here this evening. So much thanks to you all. I want, of course, to thank those online, the participants. This, of course, I think has been recorded, so hopefully it will be available for those who might have missed some or part, or part of it. We also want to acknowledge and just remind the topic, very key topic this evening, ILO key agenda issues from the ILC. That's the International Labour Conference 2024, decent work and the care economy, fundamental principles and rights at work at a critical crossroads, and protection against biological hazards, where we're looking at setting a standard for that. So, and of course, all of that in the context of the implications for the workplace of Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you very much all. Do look forward as we continue to commemorate labor by a series of activities. So we would certainly be making the announcements possibly for another webinar in short time, and some other activities that will be advised. So do look out for that as we go forward within the next week or so. So thank you all, and do have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
And thank you to the chair.
Thanks, Rosamay.
All right,
Thank
take
you.
care. Take care all.
Take care all.
Okay. Thanks, Ozzy. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Trevor.